My sister was very fond of picking random items she found on the floor, and that's how she picked the demon. My name is Richard, and my younger sister is named Rita. Rita was just a young child, obsessed with fancy items. We lived with our parents, and my parents loved and cherished Rita so much that they couldn't say no to her. Rita had many toys in her room, but she was never satisfied. She loved fancy, even sometimes creepy toys. Her picking attitude began at home. Any object of elegance or beauty, she would pick and take to her room. She even picked knives and jewelry. Anything she saw, she picked and hoarded it to drop in her room. The worst part is that she doesn't use what she picks, she just picks it. I complained severally to my parents, but their reply was always, "She's just a kid." But I wasn't happy with that. Her picking fingers grew from picking at home to actually picking our neighbor's property. She picked it to keep in her room, and any time our neighbors raised an alarm about missing items, it turned out to be Rita who took them. Everybody was seeing her as a baby, except me. She was already 4 years old and should stop stealing. I saw it as stealing. Then, one night, while returning from a family stroll, Rita saw a creepy-looking doll near a bush, and her picky fingers couldn't pass it by. As she moved to pick it up, I wanted to stop her, but my parents wouldn't allow me. They asked me to leave her alone. Rita picked the doll and was taking it to our house, and I honestly was not happy. The doll looked very scary and frightening at sight, but my parents still allowed her to keep it. After the family stroll, we arrived home, and I began to notice something strange. Rita never played with anything she picked. She just kept it in her room and looked for something else to pick. But this time, Rita was playing with the doll, and that spooked me out. Rita then took the doll to her room, and shortly after, I followed her to see what Rita was doing. I peeped through the keyhole in the door and saw Rita giving the doll a name. She named it Lucy, which I think stands for Lucifer, the devil. It looked as if Rita was actually talking to the doll, and surely I knew something was not right. I tried to enter Rita's room, but the door was locked, so I just walked up to my room to sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by a loud scream coming from Rita's room. I quickly ran to Rita's room to see what may have caused her to scream. At this time, I barged into Rita's room, only to find her wide awake and seemingly talking with that doll. "Rita, what made you scream by this time of the night?" I asked in dismay. "Oh, no need to be afraid, brother. I was just playing with my friend Lucy," Rita said. "And you shouted like that? You could have given me a heart attack." I queried. "Well, I'm sorry for waking you up. You can go back to sleep now. I and Lucy want to play a game." "We have been playing all night," Rita said. "So, you haven't slept all night?" I asked, still in disbelief. "Yes, we haven't slept all night, and we don't intend on sleeping anytime soon," Rita said. "Well, you better go to bed now, or I'll get rid of your stupid doll," I said in a harsher tone. As soon as Rita heard me say, "Get rid of your stupid doll," she immediately looked straight into me. Her facial expression changed. I was confused as to how a 4-year-old could have such an expression. She kept staring at me in a scary way and didn't blink. When I looked straight into her eyes, I saw her doll, Lucy, holding a knife. I saw Lucy holding a knife, dripping blood from her mouth, and Lucy smiled. It was as if I was hypnotized, as I couldn't take my eyes off Rita's eyes. After seeing Lucy smile at me, Lucy then shut her eyes, and Rita fell down with her eyes closed. Immediately Rita shut her eyes, either she or the doll was looking at me. This scared me so much, I placed her on her bed, thinking she had fallen asleep due to tiredness. I then took Rita's doll and kept it under the bed before going to my room to sleep. The next day, I went to check on Rita and found her doll on her bed. I remember vividly that I kept the doll under the bed. How did it move to the bed? I asked myself. I went closer to Rita's bed, and she seemed to still be asleep. I wanted to ask her if she had moved the doll from under the bed, so I began tapping her to wake her up, but Rita wasn't waking up or even responding to the tap. I got scared, as I began to feel that the doll had done something bad to Rita. I tapped her severally and shouted in her ears, but she wasn't responding. I then noticed that Rita's doll, which she called Lucy, was staring at me. "What have you done to her?" I shouted at the doll. I then went to bring petrol and a lighter to set the doll ablaze. I poured the petrol on the doll and burned it. I didn't turn off the fire till the doll turned to ashes. I swept the ashes and went to dispose of them in the trash can. Then I heard our doorbell ring. I went to open the door, but didn't see anyone. I looked left and right, but still no one. I was about to shut the door when I looked down and saw Rita's doll. I was scared 100%, as the doll I had just burnt appeared in front of me. "You're an evil doll. I don't know why my sister picked you in the first place. Just go away," I said, screaming at the doll. Some people thought that at that point I was crazy, as I was shouting at a doll. I knew that the doll that Rita brought into the house was not an ordinary doll. I must find a way to get rid of it for good, I said to myself. The doll then began to act strangely. It seemed to become a mirror-like substance as I could see myself inside it. I was still staring at myself when I heard some laughing noise. The noise seemed to come from Rita's room, so I shut the door, leaving the doll outside there as I headed to Rita's room. When I opened the door, what I saw almost shocked me to death. I saw Rita sitting on the bed, laughing strangely with the same doll. I knew that the doll was evil and I must find a way to get rid of it, I said. "Rita, I actually thought something terrible had happened to you, as you refused to wake up," I said. "Sorry for making you scared, brother, but actually I wasn't sleeping. I was in another realm, having fun with Lucy," Rita said. "Rare, I don't think your doll is an ordinary doll." "Something is wrong," I said, walking closer to Rita. "What do you mean?" Rita said, and her voice had suddenly changed into a thicker voice. "Rare, I'm sorry, but I have to get rid of this doll," I said, as I stretched my hands to grab the doll. Then Rita's outburst extremely shocked me. She brought out a knife from behind her and pointed it straight to my face. She then asked me to leave her room, else she'll use the knife on me. As I was about to leave the room, I then noticed Rita's doll smiling at me. I became scared for my sister's sake, so I decided to inform my parents about the weird happenings between Rita and the doll. I then went straight from Rita's room to my parents' room. On my way to my parents' room, I heard screams coming from my parents' room. The scream was like the last one I heard coming from Rita's room. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me as I raced to my parents' room. Upon my arrival, the door was closed. I tried turning the knob, but it didn't open. I then applied force as I managed to break through the door. When I got inside the room, I couldn't find anyone there. I searched the wardrobe and the rest of the room, but didn't find anyone. But if there was no one here, how could I then hear screams coming from here? I said to myself. I was still in thought when I heard the doorbell in the parlor ring. I went to open the door and found Rita's doll at the entrance. I screamed at the sight of the doll, and then my mind flashed back to Rita's room. I closed the door and quietly proceeded to Rita's room. I quietly twisted the doorknob to open the door, but the door was locked from the inside. I then peeped inside the room through the keyhole, and I saw the unimaginable. I saw Rita's doll holding the knife that Rita pointed at me earlier in her hands. I was still peeping when Rita came to the doll and took the knife from its hands. I noticed that Rita was smiling strangely. The smile was just the same way that the doll kept smiling at me. I also noticed something about her eyes. I could see the doll holding a knife inside of Rita's eye. All these things just made me more scared as my heart beat faster, and I began sweating more than usual. I stopped looking inside Rita's room as I placed my hand on my chest, trying to catch a breath. My brain was completely shut down. I couldn't think of what to do. I then summoned courage and decided to keep looking inside the room through the keyhole. As soon as I fixed my eyes inside the keyhole, the image of Rita's doll suddenly appeared in front of me. I jumped away from the door in fear as I used my back to hit the ground hard. I didn't feel the pain of the impact of hitting the floor. All I just felt was fear running a milestone inside of me. I have never been so scared to that extent in my life before. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but I was eager to find out what Rita was going to do with that knife and why my parents were missing. I held my heart so tight as if it was going to jump out. I summoned up myself as I stood up from the ground and walked slowly to the door. Upon arriving close to the door, I could hear Rita laughing so strangely. It was as if she was laughing and crying at the same time. I peeped at the door, and this time I didn't see Rita's doll. Then I looked further and saw Rita doing something that I couldn't have ever imagined. I first saw my parents tied to the floor with ropes. I then saw Rita using the knife to slice the throat of my parents. She then began to slice their bodies into pieces. I could see her laughing while slicing it, but tears were dropping from her eyes. I couldn't hold back myself as I knew that it's the evil doll at work and not Rita. I stopped peeping and leaned against a wall. I placed my hand on my head as I started thinking of how the doll had destroyed my family. This got me so angry that I couldn't understand what just took control of my body. I applied extreme force on the door and it opened. I then picked a knife and stabbed the doll on sight. Then something strange began to happen. The doll began to gush out blood. Then I realized that it wasn't the doll I stabbed. It was actually my sister. The doll had manipulated my mind into thinking that I was stabbing the doll, not knowing it was Rita. Rita gushed so much blood so quickly as she fell and died on the spot where my parents were killed. I watched my parents die, and now I watched my sister bleed to death. I just placed my hand on my head as tears began flowing down my cheek. I didn't know what to do, who to call, or where to go. Fear had clouded my entire life. There were 3 completely dead bodies in my hands. What am I going to do? I said, shouting at myself and losing my mind. I turned and found Rita's doll smiling strangely at me. Then I heard a knock on the door. As soon as I heard the knock, I was weak inside. Who might that possibly be? I said to myself as I ignored the knock for the first time. Then the knocking continued. I stood up from where I was sitting and moved towards Rita's room door. I looked at my parents, who were chopped into pieces, and by the mere sight of them, tears flowed uncontrollably from my eyes. As I was leaving Rita's room to go open the door, I turned and saw Rita's doll feasting on her body. I couldn't do anything as I just walked to open the door to see who was knocking. I opened the door and saw that it was actually our pastor who was knocking on the door. I breathed a sigh of relief after seeing my pastor. I knew he was the one who could help me. The pastor looked at me and was shocked. I already knew it was because of the bloodstains on my hands. "Richard, why are there bloodstains on your hands, and where are your parents and your sister?" the pastor asked. I explained to the pastor everything that happened. I told him about the evil doll that Rita found in the bushes, and how the doll possessed Rita and used Rita to kill my parents, and then manipulated my mind into stabbing Rita, thinking I was stabbing the doll. I told the pastor all this in tears, and the pastor began to console me. The pastor was still consoling me when a big snake the size of an anaconda appeared. The snake then began to move from Rita's room to the parlor where I and the pastor were. The snake then moved to our front and then changed into Rita's doll. "Pastor, this is the evil doll that Rita picked near the bushes," I said. "No, that can't be. I thought we got rid of this evil creature," the pastor said. "Pastor, do you know it?" I asked in shock. "Yes, it appeared in the church one morning in the form of a woman and then turned into a snake. We immediately wanted to kill the snake before it turned into this doll," the pastor said. "We immediately burnt it and threw the ashes close to a bush," the pastor said. The doll then changed into a snake and began to approach us. Then the pastor rose the Bible up and lightning immediately struck the snake. Then the snake disappeared and was nowhere to be found. The pastor called the police, and I was taken for questioning for possible murder. After explaining all to the police, I was found not guilty and was free to go. I started living with the pastor and his family, as I had lost mine. This is a sad story that I'll never forget in my lifetime. The end.